The old wooden house, a relic of a bygone era, stood sentinel at the fringe of the sprawling Appalachian forest. Its timbers, weathered by countless seasons, creaked and groaned, like an old ship in a storm, a symphony that had become the backdrop to Mister Fitzwilliam's quiet life. He was a man as seasoned as his dwelling, his face a roadmap of gentle smiles and thoughtful furrows etched by 70-odd years of sunrises, witnessed and storms weathered. His companions in this tranquil solitude were two felines of distinctly different yet equally endearing personalities. Marmalade, a ginger tom, whose luxurious fur mirrored the autumn foliage, and whose greatest ambition was to conquer every sunbeam that dared trespass into the house, and Sooty, a sleek black queen, agile and enigmatic, her eyes like chips of polished peridot, constantly observing the world with an air of regal suspicion that often melted into purring affection. For several weeks, a silent, almost spectral visitor had graced their patio door, an apparition from the wild heart of the forest. It was a bobcat, a creature of breathtaking, untamed beauty. Her fur was a masterpiece of natural camouflage, a canvas of tawny spots and subtle stripes that shifted and shimmered with her every movement. She would materialize as the morning mist still clung to the tall pines and ancient oaks, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of silent hunts and hidden pathways. The first time Mister Fitzwilliam had seen her, his heart had performed an uncomfortable little jig against his ribs. A wild cat so close to his cherished home, his beloved pets he'd watch frozen in his worn armchair as she approached the glass, her tufted ears tipped with black twitching assessing. Then with an almost human-like delicacy, she'd lifted a spotted paw, its pads a soft dusky pink against the cool pane, mirroring Marmalade's own curious tap from the safety of the inside. Marmalade, usually a boisterous chaser of dust motes and imaginary foes, was utterly transfixed. He'd press his nose to the glass, his whiskers quivering a low inquisitive rumble starting deep in his chest. Sooty, ever the more cautious, would observe from a slight distance, her tail giving a slow, almost imperceptible swish, her emerald eyes wide and unblinking. The bobcat would sit there sometimes for an hour or more, simply watching. Her golden eyes, flecked with amber, held an intensity, a profound stillness that Mister Fitzwilliam found himself increasingly drawn to. She wasn't aggressive, not in the slightest. There were no flattened ears, no guttural growls, no bared teeth. Instead, he saw a quiet curiosity, a poignant, almost wistful longing in her gaze as she observed the domestic bliss within Marmalade, batting playfully at Sooty's tail. Sooty grooming Marmalade with rough, affectionate licks, both cats winding themselves around Mister Fitzwilliam's ankles, purring their contentment. Sometimes the bobcat would meticulously groom her wild fur, her pink tongue, a blur of motion, the act strangely intimate despite the glass barrier. Or she'd delicately lick a paw, pausing to gaze at the two house cats as if comparing notes on feline etiquette. Often just before the sun climbed high enough to burn off the last vestiges of mist, she would curl into a compact furry ball right on the braided doormat, a silent, wild guardian stationed at their threshold, before melting back into the whispering woods as silently as she had arrived. Mister Fitzwilliam, a kindly man, with a heart as warm and expansive as his crackling hearth, found his initial unease dissolving like sugar in tea. He was a retired botanist, a man who had spent his life observing the quiet miracles of the natural world. This felt like another unfolding right before his eyes. He began to talk to her, his voice a low soothing murmur through the glass. "Well now, aren't you a pretty sight this morning, young lady?" he'd say, or, "Marmalade and Sooty are very pleased to see you again, you know." He wasn't sure if she understood the words, but she would often blink slowly, her ears perking towards his voice, a gesture he took as a sign of acknowledgement, perhaps even a flicker of trust. The days shortened, and the vibrant greens of summer gave way to the fiery hues of autumn. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of woods and decaying leaves. The bobcat's visits remained a steadfast ritual. Mister Fitzwilliam noticed she was a little thinner, her wildness perhaps a little more pronounced as the season of plenty waned. He started leaving out a small dish of fresh water near the patio, though he never saw her drink from it. He knew better than to offer food. He didn't want to tame her, to strip her of the wild independence that made her so magnificent. Yet his heart ached with a strange empathy. His own cats, far from being scared or territorial, seemed to have accepted the bobcat's presence as a normal part of their day. Marmalade would often sit for extended periods by the door, his tail twitching in what Mr. Fitzwilliam could only interpret as a friendly greeting, sometimes letting out soft chirping meows. Sooty too would join him, her earlier suspicion replaced by a calm, watchful interest. It was as if they understood on some primal level the silent communication passing between their wild cousin and themselves. One particularly blustery afternoon, as the wind howled a mournful song through the eaves and sent leaves swirling in a chaotic kaleidoscope of reds, golds, and browns, Mr. Fitzwilliam sat in his armchair, a steaming mug of chamomile tea warming his hands. He watched the bobcat huddled against the patio door, seeking what little shelter the overhang provided from the biting wind. Her fur was ruffled and she looked smaller, more vulnerable than usual. Marmalade was on the inside, mirroring her position, a paw resting gently on the glass. A wave of something akin to protectiveness washed over Mr. Fitzwilliam. He looked at his own cats, snug and safe in their warm home, and then at the wild creature braving the elements just a pane of glass away. "Well, my dears," he murmured, stroking Marmalade's soft head, the ginger Tom leaning into the touch with a contented sigh. "It seems you have a rather persistent admirer, and a rather cold one at that today. Perhaps," he mused, his gaze drifting back to the bobcat, "perhaps it's time for a proper introduction." The thought was both thrilling and daunting. This wasn't a stray tabby. This was a bobcat, a predator. But everything he had observed over the past weeks, every gentle gesture, every soft gaze told him this particular bobcat meant them no harm. His heart, a compass that had rarely led him astray, urged him forward. With a deep breath, a silent prayer for understanding, and a touch of trepidation that fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird, he rose from his chair. He moved slowly, deliberately, not wanting to startle the wild visitor. Marmalade and Sooty, sensing a shift in the usual routine, watched him with wide, curious eyes. He reached for the handle of the patio door. "Easy now, girl," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. With infinite care, he slid the door open just a few inches at first. A gust of cold air swirled into the warm room, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The bobcat, who had been resting her head on her paws, lifted it sharply, her golden eyes instantly locking onto the opening, then onto Mr. Fitzwilliam. For a heart-stopping moment, she tensed every muscle in her lithe body, coiled ready for flight or fight. Mr. Fitzwilliam held his breath, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Marmalade, ever the bold one, padded forward, his tail held in a question mark. Sooty followed a pace behind her sleek body, low to the ground. They stopped at the threshold, peering out at the bobcat, who was now just a few feet away, no longer separated by glass. The bobcat remained frozen, her gaze flicking between Mr. Fitzwilliam and his cats. Then, to Mr. Fitzwilliam's immense relief, her posture softened almost imperceptibly. The tension seemed to seep out of her, replaced by that familiar, intense curiosity. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. What followed was a delicate, silent ballet of interspecies diplomacy. Marmalade, with a soft chirp, was the first to brave the outdoors. Stepping cautiously onto the cold patio stones, he approached the bobcat slowly, his body language open and inquisitive. The bobcat lowered her head slightly, a sign of non-aggression in the feline world. They touched noses, a brief, tentative sniff. Sooty, emboldened, followed Marmalade, her approach equally cautious. She too shared a gentle nose touch with the wildcat. Mr. Fitzwilliam watched, his heart swelling. There were no hisses, no growls, no flattened ears or bared teeth, just a quiet mutual investigation. Soon an unspoken understanding seemed to blossom between the three felines. The bobcat, whom Mr. Fitzwilliam now affectionately named Whisper, due to her silent arrivals and departures, began to join the house cats in their sunbathing sessions on the patio when the autumn sun was kind enough to show its face. She'd keep a respectful distance at first, but gradually the space between them dwindled. They would explore the perimeters of the small fenced garden together, Whisper moving with a wild grace that made Marmalade's playful pounces look endearingly clumsy. Mr. Fitzwilliam never tried to touch Whisper instinctively, understanding that their bond was predicated on her terms, her wildness respected. He would speak to her in his gentle tones, and she would often turn her tufted ears towards him, her golden eyes blinking slowly. It was enough. Then the first snows of winter began to fall, soft, silent flakes that transformed the landscape into a monochrome wonderland. The forest became a stark, beautiful, but undeniably harsh environment. Mr. Fitzwilliam's worry for Whisper grew with each passing day as the temperatures plummeted. He'd see her tracks in the snow near the patio, sometimes a faint depression where she'd rested. But her visits became less regular, her appearances briefer. One particularly frigid evening, with the wind howling like a hungry wolf and the snow piling up against the windows, Mr. Fitzwilliam found Whisper huddled on the doormat, shivering, her fur dusted with snowflakes. His heart couldn't bear the sight. He knew wild animals were resilient, built for such conditions. But the bond they had formed, the trust she had shown, compelled him to act. Leaving the door slightly ajar that night was a leap of faith. He laid out an old soft blanket near the hearth, hoping against hope. Marmalade and Sooty seemed to understand periodically, going to the slightly open door and peering out into the snowy darkness, as if inviting their wild friend in. Exhausted by worry in the late hour, Mr. Fitzwilliam eventually drifted off to sleep in his armchair. He awoke in the dim pre-dawn light to the soft crackling of embers in the fireplace. And there, curled on the old blanket, was Whisper. She was not alone. Marmalade was snuggled close against one side, his ginger fur a warm contrast to her spotted coat, and Sooty was nestled on the other, her black fur sleek and dark. All three were fast asleep, a picture of such profound peace and interspecies harmony that it brought tears to Mr. Fitzwilliam's eyes. Her wild grace for a time had been tamed not by force or cunning, but by the simple universal language of warmth, acceptance, and friendship. Throughout that harsh winter, Whisper became a regular overnight guest. She would arrive at dusk, a silent shadow materializing from the snow-laden trees, and slip through the slightly open patio door. She'd greet Marmalade and Sooty with soft headbutts and a rumbling purr that surprised Mr. Fitzwilliam with its depth before settling by the fire. She never ventured further into the house, never showed any interest in his food, beyond a polite sniff, always retaining a core of her wildness. But in those shared moments of warmth with his domestic cats and their wild cousin curled together, Mr. Fitzwilliam witnessed a quiet miracle, a testament to the gentle language of friendship that transcends all boundaries, a comforting rhythm in the heart of a long, cold winter. Then, as the first tentative signs of spring began to whisper through the thawing land, the insistent chirping of returning songbirds, the brave green shoots pushing through the snow-weary earth, Whisper's visits became erratic, then stopped altogether. For several long, anxious weeks, she didn't come. The patio door, now often left hopefully ajar during the milder days, remained unvisited. The doormat lay empty. A heavy silence descended upon the little wooden house, a silence far more profound than the usual quietude. Marmalade, usually so full of playful antics, would sit by the glass for hours, his gaze fixed on the tree line, letting out soft, questioning meows that tore at Mr. Fitzwilliam's heart. His vibrant spirit seemed subdued, his sunbeam naps restless. Sooty, ever watchful, would pace the length of the patio, her emerald eyes scanning the forest edge with a worried intensity, her sleek body taut with an unspoken anxiety. She'd often refuse her favorite treats, her attention solely on the empty space where Whisper used to appear. Mr. Fitzwilliam, too, felt a pang of deep loss and a growing gnawing fear. The forest, so beautiful and familiar, now seemed to hold a more menacing air. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, but also of unforgiving dangers, predators, scarce food, in the late winter months, illness, accidents. Had she fallen prey to a coyote pack? Had an injury befallen her, leaving her unable to make the journey? Or had she simply decided that her time with them was over, that the call of her wild life had pulled her back completely? Each day without a sign of Whisper felt heavier than the last, a heart-wrenching silence where there once was quiet anticipation and the soft padding of wild paws. The joy that her presence had brought now cast a long shadow of absence. Mr. Fitzwilliam found himself wandering to the window countless times a day, his gaze sweeping the familiar paths she used to take. He'd call her name softly into the wind, "Whisper, whisper, girl," but only the rustle of new leaves and the distant caw of a crow would answer. He even considered, in moments of acute worry, venturing into the forest himself to search for her. He knew the trails closest to his home, but the deeper woods were vast and easy to get lost in, especially for a man of his years. Prudence and a nagging fear of what he might find or not find kept him tethered to his home. He knew realistically the chances of finding a lone bobcat in such an expansive wilderness were slim to none. All he could do was wait and hope and try to comfort his two grieving cats who clearly missed their wild friend as much as he did. The absence stretched from days into a week, then two, then three. The vibrant burst of early spring, with its daffodils and crocuses pushing through the soil, felt muted, its beauty overshadowed by their collective worry. Mr. Fitzwilliam tried to maintain his routines for his own sake and for Marmalade and Sooty, but a persistent ache resided in his chest. He'd catch himself listening for the telltale scratch at the door, the soft thud as she landed on the patio, only to be met with the familiar sounds of the old house settling around him. The vibrant tapestry of their unusual friendship felt cruelly unraveled, just as a sliver of despair, cold and sharp, began to truly creep into Mr. Fitzwilliam's heart, threatening to extinguish the last embers of hope. On a morning when the sun finally broke through a persistent spell of spring rain, painting the dew-kissed forest in strokes of gold and emerald, a familiar figure emerged from the trees. Mr. Fitzwilliam was at the kitchen sink washing his breakfast dishes, his gaze idly drifting towards the forest edge, as had become his habit. At first he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, his longing conjuring phantoms. He blinked, then blinked again. No, it was unmistakably her. It was Whisper. Her fur, perhaps a little thinner from the rigors of whatever had kept her away, still held that beautiful tapestry of spots and stripes. She moved with her customary grace, though perhaps a little more slowly, a little more deliberately than he remembered. A gasp escaped his lips, and a teacup slipped from his soapy fingers, clattering harmlessly into the plastic basin. "Marmalade Sooty!" he cried out, his voice thick with emotion. "She's back, Whisper is back." The two cats who had been listlessly grooming nearby shot up as if jolted by electricity. They raced to the patio door, their tails held high, their earlier lethargy completely vanished, replaced by an electric excitement. Marmalade pressed his nose to the glass, letting out a volley of excited chirps and meows. Sooty stood beside him, her body quivering, her emerald eyes wide and bright. But as Whisper drew closer, Mr. Fitzwilliam realized she was not alone. Trotting shyly behind her, their tiny paws making faint, almost invisible imprints in the damp earth and melting patches of old snow, were two small spotted bobcat cubs. They were miniature versions of their mother, all big blue eyes, as young kittens often have tufted ears and impossibly fluffy spotted fur. They stuck close to Whisper's heels, occasionally stumbling over their own oversized paws, looking at the world with a mixture of innate wild caution and kittenish curiosity. Everyone was shocked. Mr. Fitzwilliam felt his eyes well with tears, a wave of overwhelming emotion, relief, joy, astonishment washing over him. He fumbled with the latch of the patio door, his hands trembling, and pushed it wide open. Whisper paused at the edge of the patio, looking at him, then at Marmalade and Sooty, who were now practically vibrating with joyous anticipation. She gave a soft, reassuring chuff, a sound deep in her chest, and then with a gentle nudge of her head, encouraged her cubs forward. Hesitantly, the little ones, no bigger than Marmalade's head, took a few tentative steps onto the unfamiliar stone of the patio. One cub, slightly bolder than its sibling, let out a tiny, almost inaudible mew. Marmalade, ever the gentle soul, couldn't contain himself. He padded out slowly, his usual boisterous energy tempered with an astonishing gentleness. He approached the bolder cub, sniffing delicately. The cub, startled for a moment, flattened its tiny ears, but Marmalade simply lay down, emitting a low rumbling purr. Then, to Mr. Fitzwilliam's utter amazement, Marmalade began to tenderly lick the top of the cub's spotted head. The little bobcat, seemingly reassured by this universal gesture of feline affection, relaxed, even leaning into the grooming. Sooty, who had always possessed a certain regal aloofness, surprised them all. She approached the shyer cub, which had hidden behind Whisper's legs. With a surprising maternal grace, Sooty lowered her head and nuzzled the little one softly, her sleek black fur a beautiful, stark contrast to the cub's wild spots. She let out a soft, welcoming chirp, and the cub, after a moment's hesitation, tentatively touched its nose to hers. Whisper watched this unfolding scene, her golden eyes soft with a mother's love, and what Mr. Fitzwilliam could only interpret as a friend's profound trust. She looked at him a long, steady gaze, and then blinked slowly, a gesture he had come to understand as her quiet form of communication of acknowledgement. It was as if she were saying, "These are my children. I trust you with them as I trust this place." The heartwarming sight filled the small yard and Mr. Fitzwilliam's equally small kitchen with an unspoken, radiant joy. The heart-wrenching anxiety of the past weeks melted away, replaced by a profound sense of wonder and gratitude. The silent, empty spaces Whisper's absence had created were now filled with the tiny, inquisitive movements of her offspring and the gentle, welcoming gestures of his own beloved cats. Mr. Fitzwilliam slowly sank into his armchair, his gaze never leaving the scene on his patio. The sun, now higher in the sky, bathed them all in its warm spring light. Whisper lay down her cubs, tumbling playfully around her, occasionally batting at Marmalade's twitching tail or trying to pounce on Sudie's patiently swishing one. The house cats, far from being annoyed, seemed to revel in the attention, their earlier grief replaced by a gentle, nurturing playfulness. The beautiful circle of friendship, so painfully broken, was now complete, once more expanded and enriched in a way none of them could ever have imagined. The old wooden house, nestled at the fringe of the sprawling forest, was no longer just home to Mr. Fitzwilliam and his two beloved cats. It had become a haven, a meeting place, a testament to the enduring, surprising, and deeply touching connections that could be forged between humans and animals, and even between the wild and the tame. The future promised many more days of shared sunbeams, gentle purrs, and the quiet, breathtaking magic of Whisper and her growing family. And Mr. Fitzwilliam knew with a certainty that warmed him to his very soul that this was the most beautiful shock, the most wonderful surprise life could have ever offered. This incredible story teaches us a profound lesson about empathy, trust, and the boundless nature of connection. It reminds us that understanding and compassion can bridge even the widest divides, whether between species or individuals. By extending kindness and respect even to those who seem fundamentally different from us, we can unlock unexpected friendships and create havens of acceptance where love and harmony truly flourish. It highlights the importance of observing and respecting the natural world, understanding that sometimes the greatest gifts come from embracing the wildness within and around us. What are your thoughts on this heartwarming tale? Share your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Video rating 10/10.